Hi, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Duran, Director of Product Marketing for enSilo, and I just want to welcome you and thank you very much for taking the time to join us with Welcome to What Keeps Me Up at Night, Concerns of a CISO, with Randy Potts of Real-Time Resolutions. Randy, could you start by giving us a little background on yourself and Real-Time Resolutions, and you have control of the screen.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Hi, I'm Randy Potts. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for a company called Real-Time Resolutions. I've been working in information security for about 14 years now. Started out working satellite communications. Security became an issue. I quickly became the security guy for the company I was at, and just have been doing that ever since. Real-Time Resolutions as a company, we do essentially call centers, customer service type work, mostly targeted at the financial services market. So as we hop into this, what I'm going to share with you today is just some of the things that when I wake up at 3 in the morning, what's going through my head. So let me hop to the first slide here. There we go. All right, hopefully it doesn't jump too far. All right, so as I laid out these questions that I ask myself to try to stay on top of all of the security concerns that we all face every day, I put all of my questions into these 5 main buckets, which is really just breaches, which is kind of just at the top of my list as far as, that's really our purpose as information security professionals. And then we talk about bad actors. Really, those are the external people trying to get in. Bad users, which is just the user behavior that, bad might be a strong word for it, but either way, it's not the best behavior. And then all those unknown things that we see in the environment. And then my final kind of categories around efficiency and just the burden that I'm putting on the organization. All right, so let me step in. I'm going to start with breaches. So my number one priority as a security person is to keep data safe. That's where it's always kind of started. Going back to my satellite communication days, it was really about system uptime, but it was really at the end of the day about keeping that system safe, so that way people could continue to use it. Everything that we ask ourselves should really drive back to that. I think as security practitioners, we have a lot of great tools, a lot of great things that we can use, and we can really get lost in those tools, though, in the minutia of how we're configuring them, how we're using them, how we implement them. Details that can be very important, but I think one of the big questions I have for myself all the time is just, am I getting lost in the trees? Am I spending too much time focusing on one particular tool and how I'm implementing it? Is it taking too much away from my broader ability to just see what's going on, the overall environment? And really the question there is just, what's the right level? How much time should I spend digging into the proverbial weeds, into the trees, and getting into detail with each tool, versus staying at a higher level and looking out at what's really important to the company, which really brings me to that next question on the slide, which is, what is the most important to my company? Key to this from a technique, procedure, outside of having some fancy tool, is really just getting to know the business, getting to know the drivers of our revenue. So I think one of the critical things, especially as a CISO or just a security leader within the organization, is to understand what's important, to go and meet with your business leaders, talk to them, and just really figure out what the most important systems are, because you don't want to have a disconnect there and kind of miss that forest, which is, hey, the key, driver of this business is either to generate money, provide some service, whatever it is that your business does. You need to be aligned with the business people to make sure, you're protecting what is most important. And so with that, and just with that question of, hey, if I don't even know what's most important, what other blind spots do I have? And that's kind of critical. You know, do you have some business that's run off and built something, and now you have this blind spot of a revenue generator that's out there that's completely unprotected. You know, and I think we see that from time to time with, you know, a business unit that might go out and build something out in a cloud, on premise, and then all of a sudden they're out there and you have something that's becoming a key revenue generator, and then they might bring in security kind of at the back end. You know, and I've been there, and it's really difficult to try to put in security once they kind of have the product working the way they want it to work. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to change all of what's going on with their product. And so, again, key really on this to me when it comes to talking about just all the questions on this slide is just having that great business partnership, communicating with them, you know, going to lunch with them, knowing who those key people are, and working with them to understand what's most important. All right, so we're going to hop to the next slide. All right, so when we talk about bad actors, what I mean here is really people mostly outside of the organization. These are the people who are targeting us directly, who really want to get into the organization, cause disruption, steal that data, the people who are going to cause a breach. You know, in that risk terminology, we talk about this as like your threat actor. That person who is going to exploit a vulnerability to get in, steal data, and ultimately cause harm to the company. The key thing here about knowing who is targeting me, whether it be like Russian organized crime, maybe a state actor, some sort of cyber evangelist type person, you know, someone who just doesn't like us and just wants to cause us harm. The methods are really the key to that. You know, if you're a state actor, you probably have a lot more resources because you're not looking to just make money like a typical cyber criminal would be. You know, they have a margin that they're trying to maintain just like most other businesses. And so, you know, if they're not going to spend a lot of money if they don't see a lot of gain. They're also looking for low-hanging fruit too, though. And then on the cyber evangelist front, you know, you're probably looking at more like denial of service type threats. And so all of that is really going to feed into how we do our security posture. And so with that, getting at the who, typically what we're going to do is use some sort of indicators of compromise, something like that, to at least track back and try to understand who is targeting us. And that's where I get into intel feeds. And so intelligence feeds, whether they're open source or closed source, they kind of vary in quality. And definitely once you talk about those subscription services, the prices can definitely get astronomical. But they're a very valuable part. And so I find that having a mix of different threat feeds is very helpful. So that way you can correlate data between them and then figure out, hey, I'm seeing a lot of traffic from these IP addresses, the things that are successful. I see these sorts of file hashes whenever we're getting those phishing emails, things like that. The real kind of key to me when it comes to threat intelligence and with doing this whole process of understanding who the bad actors are is all about time and speed because IPs rotate around, methodologies change. So being able to identify those almost on a daily, if not weekly basis, as far as who's targeting you and what they're doing, and then doing something to disrupt that is really kind of the key thing to me as an information security professional, which is, you know, hey, this week we're really getting hammered by SSH scans. You know, maybe we need to look a little bit harder at our SSH configurations on the perimeter. Is anything exposed there? Is there anything to find? And making sure that we close all of those gaps. So today, enSilo is hosting us doing this webinar, and that's honestly one of the things that really helps me with them when it comes to answering this question. They do a great job of already correlating a lot of file hashes and IPs, just looking up to see who the actors are for the events that get generated within enSilo. The other nice thing they do is they're blocking any sort of malicious activity that's within the environment. So that really helps me out a lot. And if I do come across something that doesn't make sense to me, they also are just great on their expertise from a malware research perspective, being able to get me answers if I need an answer. So I will hop to the next slide, and we're going to talk about the internal users and just some of their behavior when we talk about that. So we just talked about bad actors and the folks who are targeting me. One of the things they're going to target outside of just trying to get directly in and exploit some vulnerability, aka like an Equifax type of environment where you just exploit Apache struts, you get into the environment. The other probably more common method is to get a user to click on something. All of those phishing emails and things that are out there. But even beyond that, is just within my user community and even within my IT community, really, who are those folks that just in the normal course of business are weakening the controls we have in place? Not out of any act of malice, really it's just they need to get their job done. And so they're going and they're finding some application and they're downloading it on their PC and they're executing it. The one thing that I think is really critical there, which we've, has kind of been security 101 for a while, is just restricting administrative rights, which is great. But I think as software evolves, we're seeing more and more software that can run without needing to be installed with administrative rights, without needing administrative rights to even run. And so then the real question just becomes, what software just period is being installed in the environment? Even when it comes to IT, even if this person can't get it to install, is IT following the process of making sure that they only install approved software, or are they just, appeasing the users and going out there and installing whatever the user needs to get the job done? And that's one of my biggest concerns, especially with IT folks. The help desk, they're there to help people. They're also my most likely user to go out to CNET or some other web page and download some software and try to get it to run to do something that a user needs done. So the real concern that I have, and one of the reasons why, again, I like the enSilo product, is when they do download that software, it's going to be packaged with something malicious, which is going to give someone a foothold in the environment. The enSilo way of functioning, which we have had this happen, where we had an admin go out, pull down a tool that was packaged with some malicious software. It really was an adware. But what was nice is they installed the tool, it ran, it did what they needed, they removed it. We got the alert that there was some adware packaged with it. enSilo prevented the adware from ever installing. So we really had no exposure, while the user at the end of the day was able to get the productivity that they wanted out of that software. Of course, that's also a good policy enforcement point to go back and make sure that we're not doing that, that we are testing things before we decide to try to actually install them in some sort of live environment. Related to that too, though, is also just making sure that all of our software is updated. I think all of us as security practitioners, try in our vulnerability management programs to update as frequently as possible, as quickly as possible. But I think we see through numerous breaches that things slip through the cracks with that. And so having something that can sit on endpoints in your environment, both servers and users, and have a good picture of all of the software that's running in your environment is very helpful. That way, when you see that Apache struts, Flash, whatever it be, the Foxit PDF or whatever one-off software. If you have that question of, man, am I running that in my environment? You need to be able to answer that question really quickly. And so just knowing, hey, we do have that vulnerable version, not waiting for the next vulnerability scan. Maybe you're running those weekly, maybe you're even daily. If you're like a lot of people out there, I think a lot of companies might be only scanning monthly or quarterly even. That data is very old and outdated. So having a tool out there that can get you more current data, almost real-time data, is incredibly important because that data also tells you what the usage is. In our own environment, we used the information we got out of enSilo to remove Flash Player from the environment because we realized while it was being used, it was being used for something like Disney.com. So not incredibly important. And so we were able to get that software out of the environment. The only other thing that I would add to this kind of bad user slide, especially when we talk about phishing emails, things that make it through email filters, is that those are kind of two key things that I think have been really helpful for us, which is strengthening your web filters and strengthening your email filters help out greatly when it comes to most phishing emails. Because the phishing email is either going to have an attachment or it's going to be directing the user to a website that asks them to download something. So in our case, probably the most current, slightly complicated one was a link to a zip file that had an Office document in it that then wanted to run a macro. Now we're even seeing bad guys get away from macros and back to dynamic linking. So that way they're reaching back out to the web to pull down some bad content. So there's not macros anymore. And so really tightening those filters is very important. Even in our environment, things still will make it through those filters though. And so you need something there as kind of your ultimate layer of security. And so that brings me to, we've defined all of these security layers and all of the security technologies we have in place, web filters, email filters, we've got intrusion prevention systems, we're logging all of our activity from a log on, log off, applications in the environment. Things are always going to come up that maybe isn't directly correlated to kind of a known malicious activity. And so that's my big question there. It's just, what is that bad behavior that I'm missing? What are the things going on in my environment that, maybe I looked at and thought weren't a big deal, but maybe if you correlate them all back, they do lead to being a problem. I think in the industry, there's this kind of thought about assume breach, right? And that is how I approach most of my days, which is just, hey, I'm breached right now. What am I doing different from yesterday to find that breach? And so I'm always digging for new data sources, new ways to look for something that could be an indication that someone's compromised, that someone's gotten in, that a user did click on an email and something executed, or they got a username and password and they're stepping through, maybe not even using malicious code, or at least not known malicious activities. So what are those things that, I'm missing, even within the software that I think is safe and not vulnerable? Are there vulnerabilities in that software? The proverbial 0-day exploit, which, someone might not spend on a lower level target, going back to like those state actors that probably spend a lot of money. But the fact is, it could still be there. Someone who works in organized crime could have, some newer technique out there and be exploiting something that I think is safe. Eventually the exploit gets found, but it existed in that software all the way up until the time that it got found. And so my real concern is just even the good software, what am I doing to prevent it from doing bad activities? And so this is actually something whenever I talk about enSilo with other folks, they'll bring it up, hey, tell me about false positives. And the reality is, I don't think enSilo necessarily has false positives so much as it shows you bad activities of your existing software. And a lot of those things can be blocked and prevented. So they remove the risk from your environment without actually breaking that software that is so business critical. We actually use this working with our current AV vendor, and enSilo had actually found a vulnerability in the way they were doing things. We worked with them. They actually fixed the vulnerability. And so we got a lot more secure, but it was one of those things where probably off of the bat, you might have said, oh, hey, that's our antivirus. Of course it's safe. Which probably someone with the Kaspersky thing said too. And then it got through. And so that kind of level of just, hey, what in my environment that I think is okay might not actually be okay. And then the real key to answering that question, right, is do I have the level of expertise? And this is something else where, having someone who's a real seasoned forensics person who can devote their time to that, that's a very expensive resource to have yourself in-house. I rely on enSilo for this a good bit. I kind of call them my forensics as a service. So if I do get to a point where I think I'm out of my wheelhouse, enSilo has a great group of malware researchers that you can submit information to, and they'll get back with you and let you know their thoughts on it if they think it really is a malicious activity. And I think that's a huge help for me when originally I was kind of looking at this space of next-gen AV, endpoint detection response, looking at forensics tools. That was really the key thing was, hey, I'm going to have all these tools and I'm really going to need the expertise to use it. And so I'll hop to the next slide here because I think that leads into my last slide here, which when I talk about kind of those three tools, next-gen AV, endpoint detection response, forensics tools, the big thing is if I need a resource for each one of those, and then I need an FTE for each one of those, or maybe a team of people supporting them, is that really the best use of the resources I have at hand? And so that's the big question I always ask myself is just with the resources I do have, am I doing all I can? Are there other places where maybe I'm wasting effort? And so that's really key to me, especially when looking for a tool. And so a tool like enSilo maybe takes me 1/10 of a person to manage it. Incredibly lightweight, very quick and easy to kind of dig in and see what's going on. We do a lot of reporting here as well, obviously, and so just tracking that down. And really the key to this, to me, is just to always be doing those risk assessments, understanding what the greatest risk to the organization is, so that way I can put resources where I think it's going to give us the most value for our money. That's really key to me. And again, that kind of goes back to that original slide, which was all about, working with your business, understanding what's important to them, and then understanding all of the things, whether it's the phishing emails, the direct attacks, the risk to those key resources, and then finding tools and techniques that really don't introduce a lot of burden to the company. And so that's one thing, when we talk about whether it's a tool or a process, if I'm putting excessive burden on the company and slowing it down, I feel like I'm working against the ultimate goal of security, which is preventing that breach, which is all about preventing loss. If I prevent the company from ever having a gain, that's almost the same as letting it have a loss. So if I'm slowing down the generation of revenue, I'm making it more difficult for the business to function. I'm really not living up to my goal, which is to protect this company and the assets it has. Instead, I'm really dragging down those assets. And so, again, going back to just within enSilo, we just kind of found that perfect kind of balance of it's doing enough to mitigate the risk. It's not overly burdensome on the company. We had very little, if any, user complaints about the tool in the environment. And so it's been incredibly helpful. And so my final question here, which I always wrap up, if I'm up at 3 or 4 in the morning for whatever reason, can't sleep, and I'm kind of asking myself all these questions about what are my blind spots, what are my gaps. The real thing is, am I asking the right questions? Is there anything that I'm missing, that I'm forgetting? What are all of these questions really covering it all? And there's so much really to cover. I don't know if you really ever do cover it all. So, I think that's an important question to have in there, because in the future, there will likely be another question, right? There's going to be new systems, new things that come up that are going to change the way or change the questions I'm asking. Whether that's a new threat actor out there, a new risk to the environment, those questions are going to change.
Well, great. That wraps us up. If there's any other questions, please feel free to email. On the screen is our contact information. Once again, thank you everyone for attending, and we'll be glad to check up with you soon. Thank you very much.